you know, we just watched some of the video there. You and Ramos got into it. Unfortunately, Kart collected as well. I want your side of the story between you and Ramos.
Yeah, so pretty much it was actually Brandon versus Ramos there. Going into the double rights, Brandon was setting Ramos up. He goes to the inside on the quick left. Ramos chops him up. Brandon goes over the curb. They're side by side, and they make contact, and they go really slow. So they slow down because they're touching. So I come back and go to the left, go to the far inside. Now we're 3 wide. Brandon has now turned off of Ramos, gotten off of his bumper. Now we're directly 3 wide. Ramos, Brandon, me. And Ramos looks at Brandon, you can see it clear as day in the video, turns to the right, collects Brandon and then collects me, and I go up in the air and spin around. And it ruined my race. And I mean, there's nothing I could really do about it. And
I mean, you and Dalton got into it in a little bit. You want to talk about it from your perspective?
I don't know. He come to me saying I sent him to like outside the track, but I didn't see him. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just not kind of racing really. It's like when you drive people hard, you send it in deep and make sure it sticks, but swerving people down the straight, like, come on. He did it once. Well, he's done it multiple times, which, yeah, okay. You save him. I helped him out a bit race last year, GoPro, and then he does the same thing again. Like, what? Like, it's supposed to be the pro class, and we're swerving people down the straight. If you sent it in hard on me and passed hard, which it's racing, which I would have respected and said, yeah, fair play. But just swerving people down the straight after you've done it multiple times, and we've spoke to each other about it multiple times, and just keeps wanting to do it. So, yeah, it's just not professional at all. So,
look, the SCUSA officials agreed not a good look. They DQ'd him for aggressive driving, going beyond the line there. And I have to say, given what we've seen in recent years of trying to get the swerve out of the sport, it makes sense. Having said that, I'm not going to go and say this was egregiously intentional by Diego. I think that, again, as same thing that we saw from from Isambard and Gavin, we're going to apply the same sort of intent. Can't always be fully judged. Not a good look. At worst, or at best, you're saying Diego really had a lapse in judgment there and should not have been doing that. But at the same time, he's not the only driver in that field that did it. He's not the first to have done it. He's not the last. Doesn't make it any less acceptable. But yeah, that's something we've seen it a few times in the last couple of years, Alex. That's something you never like to see. And in my opinion, not an incident that is to be taken lightly. And I think what the correct decision was to disqualify him. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's obviously a touchy subject, but it has to be said. It has to be had, right? Because every series has made a point that they want to eliminate swerving from racing, and they have made big strides at it, right? Because it's impossible to fully police, because at the end of the day, a driver's going to do what a driver wants to do. But the penalties now have been raised so high that usually you do it once, and it's probably the last time you're going to do it. We heard a point from Brandon Carr that he made where he the same thing happened with him and Brandon Carr over at Trackhouse. And so it's not a first time, right? And so at the end of the day, we can't talk about intent because we'll never know. I did talk to Diego off camera, and he told me, listen, like it was a lapse in judgment, right? It was more of a loss of composure because he was frustrated with Carr and how he was racing him throughout the race, and especially the corner prior kind of got into Diego, and Diego returned the favor a little bit, and unfortunately it collected Dalton, right? So to Ramos's point in the interview of he didn't see Dalton, he probably didn't see Dalton, right? Because he was the inside of a 3-wide sandwich, and maybe you could argue put himself in a bad. I wouldn't say so, because it's 2 drivers going slowly up the corner. You're going to take your 2-for-1 any chance you can. It's unfortunate for Dalton that he got collected. Ultimately, yeah, I think from what we can see in the video, it looks like Ramos completely at fault. And I hope for sure, especially with the DQ, right? Because that for sure eliminates him from the championship contention in the Winter Series. But it also it's not a good look because now you're on notice with the series, and you don't ever want to put yourself in a bad light. And so, Diego's a good kid, good driver, and for sure, I hope he looks at this, learns from it, because you also don't want to create bad blood between drivers as well and teams. So, yeah, for sure, Diego, definitely. I hope he looks at that and cleans it up.
Yeah, and again, I really do think like this is not an indictment on Diego personally. I think he's a good guy like you guys had mentioned. I think certainly this is not a good look in the slightest on him. I will say no one's hands are completely clean in the sport. At the end of the day, to some varying degree, there's always going to be some levels of infringements. Like if you're going to race at the highest level, if you're going to race at the front of a Pro X30 field, there's going to be sometimes where you maybe come close to crossing the line. Was that way beyond the line? Yes, it was unacceptable. However, Brandon Carr got a penalty for swerving last year in Orlando, and Brandon Carr has been pretty clean since then. He's a good driver, has been mostly a clean driver, but he's not immune to that kind of incident as well. Dalton Haynes, again, he was the innocent bystander, did nothing wrong in that situation, was frankly unlucky to be in that situation. Yes, it's an aggressive move, and yes, I don't doubt that Diego didn't expect to be 3 wide there because that's the place that you're almost never going to be 3 wide in a race at Homestead coming into turn number 2. But that doesn't change the fact that Dalton did nothing wrong in that situation. But again, these guys, everyone that we've seen has had some level of incident at some point in a kart race. And Diego had a really severe incident there. And we've seen that severe incident in the past. We've seen Aiden Rudolph have an incident in the 2022 Winter Series race against Finnegan Bailiff and Carson Morgan. It wasn't Cole, it was Carson Morgan that was in that incident. And again, 3 wide situation. Rudolph's side of it was, hey, I didn't see that we were 3 wide into the last corner. I didn't see that Morgan was there and Bailiff was there. And I think that you really it's something that Rudolph will have learned from. There were people calling for his head after that race. And again, I was kind of on the side of, hey, it's unacceptable maneuver. He was right to get penalized for it. Doesn't mean that he's a dirty driver. It means, hey, the move was unacceptable. And you live and learn. It doesn't make the kid, doesn't make the driver a horrible person. And I think the more that we can kind of fit that middle line of, hey, let's call it out for what it is. Like these guys are running the pro category. There shouldn't be any lenience on those sorts of moves. Like that could have been really dangerous and ended really badly for Dalton. And we were lucky that it ended up with only Dalton really doing a pirouette. Somehow the kart was fine, which is a testament to Sodi, I guess you could say, for building a kart made out of titanium, apparently. But I mean, that incident ended up relatively inconsequential. In the other incident that I was talking about with Finn and with Carson Morgan and Aiden Rudolph, yes, the aftermath of it, people calling for Rudolph's head, that was difficult. But you look back 2 years later, and what difference does it really make in terms of the long-term outcome? Like I'm sure Rudolph learned from that incident. He's toned it down a bit, and he's a good kid. Again, like all of these guys are good racing drivers that at times test the limits, go beyond the limits, and it's fair to call them out for it. It's fair to say, hey, like this was too far. This was something that is not good racing. And I think Brandon and Dalton both did a good job of kind of doing that in their interviews. They didn't say, hey, Diego's an awful person. I mean, Brandon said, hey, like he's done it before. That's not cool. That's his opinion. That's fair. And we should certainly be talking about, hey, like, let's not do this. But you have to trust these drivers to be able to learn from it. And if it's a repeated incident, there's safety measures in place. There's rules in place to make sure that if a driver does too many of these things, they aren't coming back. We've seen suspensions by the series. We've seen them work together to make sure that this kind of racing isn't tolerated. And you do that. And David, I'm going to send it over to you here because I mean, you kind of have a unique situation here where you haven't been around karting nearly as much to see a lot of the swerving epidemic over the last few years, but you're now seeing kind of the aftermath of it where you're seeing all the penalties and now the severe reaction to it. But you have seen, I mean, as a big IndyCar guy, you know how like this kind of thing, when you're playing basically battle royale open wheel car racing at 200 miles an hour, swerving's not heavily tolerated at all. It's something that is one of the worst things you can do in an open wheel car. So Do you have any extra input you like to add on to this from your perspective, kind of seeing it play out in karting like it did this weekend?
Well, yeah, and let's make no doubt about it. These are open wheel vehicles, right? I mean, the consequences, while it's a slower speed accident, can be very catastrophic, no matter what category you're racing in. Whether you're in an X30, whether you're in an Indy Pro car, whether you're in an Indy car, Formula One. We've seen it in the past in every level of the sport. When someone swerves, chances are the consequences are real bad. And so, yeah, we've seen efforts that sanctioning bodies across the world have made to limit the amount of blocking and swerving, and when can you make a move? How many moves can you make? Can you make a move and then come back across the track or not? There's all sorts of different theories about what's acceptable and what is unacceptable. But I think that I think you know it when you see it, right? You know it when it's out of bounds, when it's too much, when a line has been crossed. And in this particular case, really obvious that a line got crossed, right? I mean, there's no real gray area when you're in a short shoot between the first and second corners at Miami, and you're turning into the corner that early, or turning into another driver that early. I mean, there was really no, kind of like Alex said, there was really nothing good. There was no positive result that was going to come out of that. And frankly, like I said earlier, the result that we got was very lucky, because Dalton could have been seriously hurt. And let's say instead, the cart that gets launched in that 3 wide confrontation is Brandon Carr. He's right in the middle of a group of 4 go-karts. If that thing goes upside down, there's a very good chance he gets thrown out of the cart and gets hurt, because someone else would have hit him. Because there's only so much reaction time you can have when someone gets turned upside down in the middle of a group like that. So, yeah, I mean, there's a reason why blocking is frowned upon at pretty much every level of the sport, outside of Formula One, ironically enough. But I think it's a good thing that sanctioning bodies see that, recognize it, and especially, I guess it's a newer thing in karting, as you guys say, but hey, you know what? I think it's the right call. It's just a safety thing, and frankly, it's a more legitimate competition. I mean, yes, you want to see guys be able to defend their position. I don't think you want to go to the rule that the Indy Racing League had for a little while, which actually cost Helio Castroneves a win at Edmonton, where you can't make a move at all. But I think there's definitely a difference between making a defensive move, anticipating the move that your opponent is going to make, and turning into a guy on a straightaway.
Yeah, it definitely is something that, I mean, look, it's not in karting, in any level of motorsports is dangerous. In IndyCar in particular, we've seen instances with swerving, we've seen penalties with swerving. In F1, we've seen instances with swerving, and yet somehow we end up in the same boat where they don't penalize it as much as they should have. But hopefully with this weekend and with other weekends, we can continue to work to try to get this out of karting. And I mean, again, the Diego incident didn't catch it on the main broadcast, but that doesn't mean it wasn't any less impactful. I mean, these are guys that are still high quality drivers racing for the front field positions in the pro categories. So again, this was a great weekend of racing in Homestead. I know we spent the last 45 minutes or so talking about some of the negative parts of the weekend, but again, some great racing.